For too long, third-person video games in recent memory have been taking a more realistic approach even in sci-fi video games. From Dark Souls to the new Tomb Raider reboot, the physics, animations, and themes have drastically changed to mimic realism. Even the new God of War took a slightly more grounded approach in its game design compared to its former titles. Long forgotten are the gamey games of the past decade, where games like Devil May Cry or the older God of Wars or the older Tomb Raiders had very little to do with realism. While a few exceptions obviously do exist, like Nier Automata or Metal Gear Revengeance, or even the first two Darksiders games, they are few and far between. So when Darksiders 3 was announced, it was exciting news for fans of old school hack and slashers. Darksiders 3 on PC, though not graphically outstanding in its features, is still visually impressive with cool post-processing and particle effects. The textures may appear bland in a few places, but its vibrant art direction mostly makes this a non-issue. While it may not win any awards for graphical optimization, it doesn't do poorly in that department either. On max settings, I was able to maintain a mostly steady frame rate. There were a few open areas that saw a few dips, but not nearly enough to take away from the overall experience. The combat in Darksiders 3 is through and through a hack and slasher, but a few questionable design decisions hamper the game from achieving true greatness. In Darksiders 3, you take the role of Fury, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Fury is a strong, albeit a mostly grumpy protagonist who couldn't care less for anything that stands between her and a mission, which is to silence the seven deadly sins and restore balance across heaven, hell, and earth. While the prior Darksiders games borrowed many traversal mechanics heavily from other games like Prince of Persia, God of War, Zelda, and even Portal, they still managed to do a remarkable job building on them. Darksiders 3, on the other hand, whilst borrowing a few mechanics from Dark Souls, manages to stay more original overall in comparison, but fails to impress mostly because of a lack of focus on traversal mechanics. Don't get me wrong though, Darksiders 3, like the prior two Darksiders games, grants you access to new traversal mechanics just the same, but its implementation is not the best, mostly due to its focus on grounded combat throughout and a lack of puzzles that could make use of these mechanics. This isn't to say that puzzles are non-existent, but there's only a handful of them. While a few may have you stumped for a couple of minutes, they are quite basic in the cleverness department. Darksiders 3 inevitably draws comparisons to Dark Souls because of the Souls mechanic wherein you drop your souls where you die. Unlike in Dark Souls though, you never lose access to these souls. They remain where you die no matter the number of deaths you face on your quest to reclaim these souls. Also, you can bank your souls at checkpoints where you meet your friendly demon merchant Vulgrim, even if you don't have enough of these souls to level up. This can either be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. The combat in Darksiders 3 is simple to grasp and even simpler to execute, just like in the previous Darksiders games. But the difficulty is still quite steep as it all comes down to positioning and dodging. Dodging might sound easy on paper, but with a diverse set of enemies surrounding you armed with unique attack patterns, things get a lot tricky. On higher difficulties, you will need to kite enemies and fight them one by one for best results, especially if you are playing on the standard mode. Speaking of modes, the latest patch in Darksiders 3 introduced the Classic mode, which allows you to interrupt your combos with dodges and lets you consume your health potions on the run, as opposed to the Standard mode, where I had to momentarily escape combat to chug one in quick, akin to how health potions work in Dark Souls. I beat the game on normal difficulty on my first run on the Standard mode, and later started a new game on the Apocalyptic difficulty with the Classic mode. I was surprised to notice that the bump in difficulty between the second and fourth difficulties wasn't nearly as steep as I expected, as I found myself dying a lot lesser on my second run, at least for the first quarter of the game, probably because of the classic mode that allowed me to interrupt my combos and dodge easier this time around. Sure, the enemies deal more damage now, but considering I could be a little careless with the execution of my combos in the classic mode, I found the apocalyptic difficulty to be much more forgiving than I anticipated. Another advantage the classic mode provides over the standard mode is that it fills up your wrath and havoc meters much faster, so you feel like a god using your superpowers a lot more frequently. It does make things a lot easier though, so I wouldn't recommend anyone playing the classic mode on normal difficulty unless you just want to breeze through the game. So for fans of the older Darksiders games or other hack and slash games in general, or those simply looking for a power fantasy, they are probably better off playing the classic mode on a higher difficulty. The world of Darksiders 3 is persistent, meaning though each Vulgrim's location acts as a checkpoint where you respawn, your Wrath and Havoc meters, which when full lets you unleash superpowers, do not refill upon death. So, it is advised to strategically use these superpower forms. As for the level design and exploration, they are solid. Different areas intertwine and connect beautifully. The world is littered with secrets and collectibles along the way. While you may not be able to access all the pathways until you unlock newer traversal abilities down the line, it becomes visually clear when a certain weird looking obstacle is blocking your progress, begging you to think, I think I just might be able to break past that a little while later. Despite mostly amazing level design, I found myself to be stuck on a few occasions. The radar on the HUD was so useless and so counterintuitive throughout my run. After a few minutes of aimlessly wandering around the post-apocalyptic world, I managed to stumble upon my destination by accident a few times. While this is indeed very counterintuitive by design, I only had to encounter this thrice in my entire 20 plus hour run on the normal difficulty. Another minor gripe I had with the levels is that there were very few set pieces or memorable locations throughout the game, while other modern third-person action games take you through vast areas of land littered with grand vistas that beg to be explored. Darksiders 3 keeps it more basic and simplistic. This basically sums up my opinion about Darksiders 3. While I can't fault the game for anything, be it Fury's movement, combat, story, visuals, optimization, art style, sound, music or voice, it doesn't do any of it exquisitely either. Especially after a playthrough of Darksiders 2 and listening to Jesper Kid's kick-ass soundtracks, Darksiders 3 feels like a step down pretty much in every department. As negative as I might have sounded in this review so far, I still had a great time playing Darksiders 3. There wasn't a single moment when I felt bored or frustrated to a point where I simply had to give the game a break. It was an enjoyable playthrough from beginning to end. The game may be the weakest in the series yet, but compared to what I feel are some of the best third-person action adventures in all of gaming, Darksiders 3 is still a worthy sequel. One could hope Gunfire Games and THQ Nordic would produce a Darksiders 4 featuring Strife, the fourth and final horseman of the apocalypse, only this time with a bigger budget that could very well iron out all the shortcomings of an already good game that is Darksiders 3.
There wasn't much that the humans got right, but they did know art.
What?
Frankly, I think it's one of the reasons that the angels were so jealous of them. Have you ever seen one of those birds paint?
You're talking about art. Now. Here.
It's a museum.
Looks like it has something for art lovers too.